It was nearing graduation time, and I wondered who was prouder, the students or the staff. Our graduating class was as much a tribute to their efforts as it was to our program. We learned from each other, and each other's mistakes, and shared a lot of tears along the way. I moved from the window back to my desk and smiled. There were 23 students graduating this time. But we had started with only 24. One was tossed out on his butt. I frowned, remembering the lying little felon. But he had made his own bed, and I hoped he had fared better in the state reform school. Somehow I doubted that was the case. Mrs. Adams, here are the lists of parents who will be able to make it to the graduation ceremony. I looked at Bonnie, my secretary and one of the co-founders of the school. She was, as almost always, smiling. When I checked the lists, I saw why. 21 of the students would have at least one parent or a guardian attending. Tammy Walters would not, but it was expected. Her mother and father were on a diplomatic mission and had tried their best to get free. But Tammy knew they cared. Tammy was going to spend part of the summer here, sort of as a guest, till they returned from Europe permanently. They were retiring from the diplomatic corps when they returned to be with their children. I mused that it was the best attendance so far. You have an admissions interview with Mr. and Mrs. Wallstorm and their son Harold in 10 minutes. I nodded. Please make sure the diplomas are ready for the graduation ceremony on Friday. And check to make sure they printed Angie's correctly. She giggled. Androvorowski Kalford Gudmordzewicz should have sued her parents for something. Like running off at the alphabet. She had promised us all that the day she turned 18, she would petition the court for a change of name. I straightened my skirt, touched up my makeup and hair, and headed for the gatehouse conference room. Bonnie was, as usual, prepared. Harold's application package was waiting for me, along with a large cooler of iced tea and some diet sodas. A quick check made me giggle. Stephanie was working the reception desk at the new gatehouse this morning. She was a junior and had blossomed from a scraggly runaway to a real beauty over her 3 years here. She was also our smallest student, and we had a terrible time finding her age-appropriate clothes. Ever try to buy a fashionable size 28B bra? So I headed to the conference room and reviewed Harold's folder. A typical applicant, if such a thing existed. I frowned. Too typical. Very intelligent children don't generally fit a stereotype. I went back over the test scores and doctor's reports. Harold was bright, with an IQ around 145. No noticeably strong or weak areas. Psychological profile was unremarkable. Other than depression, within normal range for a 13-year-old boy. Which was not normal. Psychologist's report was bland. Patient exhibits emotional and interest responses typical of an adolescent female, but states an exceptional attraction to females. It took a bit to find the doctor's report and blood work. Estrogen higher than normal, slightly depressed testosterone. Late development of secondary sexual characteristics. Healthy, but in the lower 10th percentile in height and weight. I sat and thought. Harold met our entrance requirements quite well. I felt there was something cheesy here. Not Limburger, but well-ripened. I heard a soft bell, and Stephanie announced that she would be bringing them to the conference room momentarily. Stephanie escorted them in and introduced me. Mr. and Mrs. Wallstorm and Harold, this is Mrs. Adams, the administrator and founder of Plainfields. We shook hands and appraised each other. One of the reasons I was en femme was to get a chance to judge the reactions of the applicant. When I saw fear and revulsion, then resignation from Harold, I stiffened momentarily. Mr. Wallstorm seemed unaffected. Mrs. Wallstorm was obviously pleased. "I am happy to be bringing Harold," she motioned to her son, who I insist be referred to as Harriet within your facility. She rambled on about how impressed she was with our security. I studied Harriet. Very feminine hair and face, a touch of makeup. The anger in the eyes did not match the shy demeanor at all. 5 minutes of general interchanges gave me little more information. Mrs. Wallstorm tried to run the show. I figured it was time to put an end to the bullshit. One of the requirements here is that all students are complete volunteers and are free to request to be disenrolled at their discretion. Part of the interview process is for the applicants to spend several hours alone with myself, our faculty, and other students, so we may get a better feel for their needs. It also allows applicants to learn about our programs firsthand. So if you would be so kind as to leave Harriet with us until, I glanced at my watch, 2 this afternoon, we can complete that portion of the interview process. Harriet squirmed, and his mother barely was able to control an outburst. "Really, Ms. Adams, is that really necessary? We are busy people and since you are so interested in the happiness of your son, you will be happy to drive around the local area and take in the spring scenery while we complete the interview process." Her husband did not manage to hide a smirk from me. She visibly deflated and looked at her son. "Harriet, please accompany Ms. Adams and behave exactly you have been instructed to behave when out in public." He clenched his jaw, relaxed, and he nodded. "My husband and I will be back at 2 to complete Harriet's enrollment." She pulled her husband to his feet and curtly departed. I looked at Harriet. He was almost certainly not a candidate for our program. Well, how much of the application package was fake? He almost fell off his chair. "You do not want to be here, that is obvious. Care to talk about it?" He was looking around like there was someone watching over him. My paranoia kicked in, and I told him to sit tight for a moment. I headed to the door and whispered something to Stephanie. I took my notepad and wrote Harriet a note. "Are you being monitored by your parents?" He stared at me, started to shake, and nodded. I added to the note, "Where is the transmitter?" He pointed to his collar. I did a quick inspection. It was a decent bug, but nothing spectacular. I was rapidly developing a hatred for his parents. I added again to the note. "Only one?" He nodded and motioned for the pen. "She is making me do this." I nodded. "Well, Harriet, since you seem to really want to be here, I guess we should take a stroll around the grounds and visit with some of the other students." He was bright and caught what I was doing. "Gladly, Mr. Adams. I really am looking forward to learning how to be a better young lady." I led him out of the room, and Stephanie giggled. "Andrew has received your request, and says there will be no problems." So much for Harriet's parents bothering us for the next several hours. We waited in the lobby, and when Stephanie said that Andrew had confirmed clearance, I motioned for Harriet to follow. We chatted about the weather and the grounds as I headed for Josephine's dormitory room, known as the Temple of Electronic Doom among the other students. She was there, and I carefully motioned to her, pointing at Harriet's collar and making a little bug motion with my hand. She snickered. 2 minutes later, I wondered if her parents had suffered hearing damage. She took a pair of pliers, carefully removed the now thoroughly fried bug, and set it on her bench. She made quiet motions and pulled out a small box with an antenna, sweeping over Harriet. She then picked up the same device she had used on the first bug and waved it, making static-looking sparks over Harriet's purse. She did another check and smiled. "Mind if I look inside?" Harriet, looking totally spooked, nodded. She pulled out what looked like a large lipstick tube and removed the bottom. A battery fell out. "So much for the infestation." She smiled with an evil chuckle. "I'm Josephine. So why did someone put a bug on you?" Harriet looked really scared. "Mom will come storming back here and she'll beat." I stopped him. "She can't get back on the grounds for at least 4 hours. I looked at Josephine. His mother is trying to force him to become a girl, and she wanted to make sure he behaved till the admission contract was signed. She growled, and then gave Harriet a hug. "Hey, for what it's worth, you're kinda cute." He cringed, but Nuff said, "Everyone here wants to be here." I shook my head. Josephine was definitely not a typical student. But she belonged here, and when she graduated next year was planning to become an electronics engineer. Harriet was just sitting there shaking. "Well, Harriet, how about we find a quiet spot and you can tell me your woes?" He nodded. Before we left, I turned on the micro recorder I was carrying. I stopped at the cafeteria and grabbed us some drinks and snacks. Soon we're at a picnic table, and Harriet was pouring out his story as he quickly devoured everything I had collected. I changed tapes twice and wondered how he had survived this long. His mother hated him. She had wanted a daughter, and he was the only child she conceived. So she tried to feminize him, and his father had fought it. She gave him small doses of hormones, and something that apparently stunted his growth. Then she caught his father with another woman, and instead of a divorce, he signed everything over to her. She said this would fix both of us. I would be forced to become a girl, and Dad would be shamed because his son was a sissy. My hackles rose. Sissy was a 4-letter word. "Want some lunch on top of the snacks?" He nodded vigorously. "Mom keeps me on a very strict diet, so I will stay thin and weak." He stared at me when I mumbled, "Not for much longer." I assigned Josephine, who was in the cafeteria, to be his escort and to bring him to the office after lunch. Then I headed back to the office. I had several calls to make and little time. Stephanie was gone, but Bonnie said that the Wallstorms had tried to come back and seemed really upset when Andrew refused them entry to the grounds. Josephine returned Harriet, and I turned the recorder over to Bonnie, explaining exactly what was going on. She gave Harriet a hug and told him everything would be okay, and not to worry. He was shaking. It was almost 2 when Bonnie announced that Jim had arrived. So I left Harriet with Bonnie and privately briefed Jim. He agreed with me and asked if he could talk with Harriet for a couple of minutes privately. We went back into the lobby. "Harriet, this is Dr. Jim Oswald, one of our consultants." I mused I was telling the truth, barely. "He will be with us during the final part of the interview with your parents, but right now I need for you to tell him, in a real quick form, what you told me this afternoon." I shoved them both in the conference room and prepared to meet the Wallstorms when they arrived. They were a bit late. But when they came in, Mrs. Wallstorm was hopping mad. "That cretin you have for a gate guard refused to let us back in and told us that the school was closed to visitors until 2. I looked at her and shrugged. "Sorry, he sometimes takes his orders too literally. But Harriet and I had an excellent chat, and he seems eager to remain here when you leave." She stared at me, and her husband grimaced. He is a shy young man, and should be able to develop his feminine side without difficulty. Now she was grinning. To myself I said in a pig's eye, "Bitch." I have asked Dr. Jim Oswald, one of our consultants, to help me finalize the program you desire for your son. He is chatting with Harriet as we speak. She looked annoyed, and I motioned for them to follow me to the conference room. Harriet almost jumped out of his skin when he saw his mother, but managed to keep from doing anything stupid. His mother tried to unobtrusively check his collar, but I blocked her and sat Harriet between Jim and myself. Jim took over. I could see the barely hidden anger in his eyes. "Harriet says you have high hopes for Plainfields. Can you tell me specifically what you want us to accomplish for Harriet during his stay here?" She proceeded to give a laundry list that included everything from brainwashing to castration. "I hope that Harriet will be ready to completely transition to becoming a young woman and complete the needed surgery when he reaches 18. Isn't that right, Harriet?" She stared at him. I hoped Jim had set things up properly. "No, Mother. I have never wanted to be a girl. You have been forcing me to look and act like one." I expected an explosion. Instead, she simply passed out where she sat. When she awoke, she was handcuffed. Mr. Wallstorm, still passive, but now smiling, was also handcuffed to a chair next to her. After she quit screaming, Jim introduced himself and pulled out his badge. "I am Dr. James Oswald, State Department of Health and Human Services, Child Abuse Division. You have the right." Stephanie was holding and hugging Harriet, who was shaking and sobbing uncontrollably, and he remained behind when the state police came and collected the Wallstorms. He managed, but where will I? "You will stay here overnight. We are licensed as an emergency care shelter by the state, and Dr. Oswald has placed you here until tomorrow, when someone from his office will come and take you to tell your story to a judge. After that, they will arrange for a foster home and medical care and help you grow up like the boy you really are." He held on to her, sobbing, until I managed to find one of the senior students to take him under her wing and get him some food. He would be lodged in the infirmary overnight for his own safety. His escort would stay with him for emotional support. Stephanie and I all sat quietly for a while. There were tears in our eyes. Stephanie spoke up. "So what will actually happen?" "Jim says Harriet." I paused. "No. He is Harold, a boy, will never be returned to his parents. He's going to have problems because of his size, and will have to unlearn a lot of feminine mannerisms. He thinks the prognosis is good because Harold was able to maintain his integrity for this long, indicating he is internally stable." She nodded. Bonnie called and told me they had misspelled Angie's name and were redoing her certificate. That provided a much-needed laugh. We all headed off to the cafeteria for a quiet dinner. As I walked to my house, I hoped the next applicants to be interviewed would belong here. I had 2 interviews tomorrow, and really wanted to go fishing instead.